Last week, President Obama expressed optimism that an agreement might be reached to avert driving over the fiscal cliff. But talks have barely progressed as Republicans refuse to cede much ground on taxes, while Democrats are doing the same with entitlements. Good morning and welcome to the News Hub. I'm Rolf Winkler. Wall Street Journal economics editor David Wessel kicks off the new week with Cliff's Notes for us. David, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I guess, I say that we don't know that a lot of progress, it doesn't look like progress is being made, but we actually don't know, do we?
We don't. I mean, in the first act of this play, there was a lot of public posturing, some of it digging in heels about positions on taxes and entitlements, as you said, and some of it trying, both President Obama and the Republican congressional leadership, to sound reasonable. Now we're in the phase where the principals, the big names, the ones that viewers would recognize, are not talking to each other. It's happening at the staff level, and by design, it's very quiet. One test of these negotiations for the insiders often is, do things leak? We know that they're looking at various options. They're trying to decide what exactly has to be done, what are the goals, what could be done short term, what long term. We don't really know very much about whether they're making progress or not.
What are the biggest hangups right now?
Well, I think we can see from the outside that one of the very biggest hangups is taxes. The Republicans have agreed to raise taxes, and they're kind of agreeing to raise taxes on the rich, but they're holding the line, at least publicly, against raising tax rates. They would rather do it through some other mechanism, perhaps getting rid of deductions and credits, perhaps changing some of the way that the tax code works. And the Democrats so far have been holding out for higher tax rates, but you can see that there's a lot of wiggle room there, and there's a lot of trying to figure out, is there a way to not take tax rates all the way back to the levels that Bill Clinton left them, raise them a little bit, and raise money from the rich by doing other things. So I think that's probably the most significant thing right now.
Is there an indication that Democrats, so we know Republicans have put revenues on the table, how much revenue it remains to be seen, but is there a sense that Democrats will offer meaningful cuts to entitlements?
Well, there will be no deal if Republicans don't agree to revenues and Democrats don't agree to some kind of cuts that Republicans deem significant in benefit programs like Medicare and Medicaid. You can see on the fringes of the parties, the far right of the Republican Party, the far left of the Democratic Party, within the room in Washington, that there's some concern that their side is going to give too much too early. So you do hear some liberal groups complaining that the president is too willing to cut entitlements too soon in the negotiations.
Now, David, the way you're describing this, it sounds like we're not talking about can kicking here, pushing off the larger issues into next year and looking for some sort of temporary solution to avert the cliff now. It sounds like the discussions happening are geared toward solving this in a more permanent fashion. Is that correct or not?
Yes, I think that's the goal. Of course, it would be a two-stage process. They would do some stuff that would take effect immediately, and they would do other stuff that wouldn't be fleshed out until later next year. But there would be a consensus and a process. So it would be kicking the can down the road, but there would be agreement as to where the can's going to land. I think in the end, if they can't do that, then they're likely to do the real can kick, which is just change the law and call the whole thing off and pretend that they've done something. That's still a possibility.
And it's not just taxes, for instance, that would rise and spending cuts, but one of the programs that would end that people are now talking about is also extended unemployment benefits.
Right. Well, one of the reasons that the December 31st date is so significant is that a number of programs enacted to help people during the recession and the painfully slow recovery are going to expire. And as you say, one of them is extended unemployment benefits that allow you to collect longer than usual. We have a story in the paper today by my colleague Ben Castleman, who says that 40% of the 5 million people who are on unemployment benefits will lose them at the end of the year unless Congress acts or they're lucky enough to find a job before then. So that would probably be rolled into some agreement, that and other things.
Okay, now talk about Tim Geithner, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner's role here.
Right. So Tim Geithner doesn't seem to have been central to the negotiations that created the fiscal cliff back in the summer of 2011. He was preoccupied with other things like financial regulation, implementing the Dodd-Frank law, and trying to get the Europeans to save us from another catastrophe. But this time the White House has made him the point man, it appears. It's his last act as Treasury Secretary, and it looks like, and my colleague Damian Paletta has a piece about this in today's Wall Street Journal, it looks like they're hoping that Mr. Geithner will have a better relationship with the Republicans because he's seen as somewhat more middle of the road than Jack Lew, the chief of staff, who was a little bit controversial during the talks last time and is a little bit to the left of Mr. Geithner on the Democratic spectrum.
Okay, David Wessel, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
And stay with WSJ Live and WSJ.com as Washington tries to avert driving over the fiscal cliff. We'll have full coverage.